Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for another installment of our study hall on Wednesdays. Today's all about diploma tasting note, but don't fret for those of you who are not in the diploma program. My colleague here, Catherine Bouguet, has some words of encouragement for you as well. But for those of you thinking about the diploma program or in the WSET diploma program, you're going to love this session because it'll give you a little bit of a snapshot into what is expected from the tasting note side. So, Catherine, welcome back. So great to have you on today.
Thank you, Christian. Excited to talk about the Diploma SAT tasting note. And in fact, for all of you, if you're in the level 3 right now, you're going to notice as you look at the screen that the SAT card looks quite similar. You'll notice just a few things that might be different. So even if you're in level 3 or even level 2 and moving up, thinking about doing level 3, you're going to notice a lot of similarities. In fact, whenever I start teaching a diploma class, I always say, look at the SAT. You know this already. You passed your level 3, so this is nothing. And then we'll help you with the things that are different. And we're going to spend a lot more time today on the conclusions, on quality assessment and bottle aging. I'll take you quickly through this note, just as sort of a reminder for anybody who's in either level 3 or in the diploma program. But then we'll move on and sort of talk about what do you need to include in the conclusions, because there's 6 points for the quality assessment and 3 generally for bottle aging. That's a lot of points. They expect you to spend time on that more so than is the acid medium, plus, or high. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and dive in. And start. I do have a wine that I will take quickly through the SAT, and then I have a note on it that I will then put up. But of course, when we're talking about the appearance, we have intensity and color, just like for those of you who've taken other levels of WSET. So you angle your wine down 45 degrees on a white surface, and you're looking between the core and the rim. Do you have a wide, watery rim? If so, it's pale. If the color saturation goes up to the rim, right before the rim, it's deep. And then if it's in between, it's medium. It really is easy enough. For the color, a lot of wines are going to be lemon, like the color that I have in my hand. When do you move it off to gold? When you see pretty gold highlights? No. You're only going to move it off to gold if there's some orange or brown in the wine. And generally that's indicating age. If there's more orange or brown in the wine, you'll move it off to amber. And of course, brown is probably something that you'll see more in fortified wines, unless there's something wrong with your wine. So with this wine, we have a pale lemon wine. Easy enough, we move on. When we go to the nose and the intensity, you put the nose under your glass. Are you able, just putting your nose into the glass, are you able to start describing that wine? For mine, I'm getting some tropical, some pineapple, some melon, and I'm getting citrus, and there's so many things that I'm getting already. You would call that a pronounced wine. So now I'm done with the scale. Now, if it wasn't pronounced, then I'd go ahead and I'd swirl, I'd smell. Is it hard to draw out aromas? Is nothing discernible? Then you'd go ahead probably and be in the light level. If not, you're in the medium camp. And only if you're in the medium camp will you then now open it up to a new 3-point scale. Do I ding it down to medium minus or bump it up to medium plus? But mine is pronounced, so I move on. The next step is aroma characteristics, and there's 5 marks available here. But it's a little different. For those of you, anybody who's in the level 3, it's a little different in that you don't have to, necessarily only give one descriptor that's in primary. Say you have all of these types in your wine. You have primary aromas, secondary aromas, and tertiary aromas. With the level 3, you had to just give one descriptor in each of those types, and then another 2 to get full marks. Not necessarily here in the diploma. So here there are more marks sometimes generated, or you could lose an extra mark if there's something distinguishable in the wine that you don't note. And so it could be something easy, like say there's oak in the wine and you don't give, an oak, but they think that oak is prevalent enough, you could actually lose 2 marks. Or you say that the wine is simple, You add something and you say the wine is simple when it's clearly complex. There's all three types and several clusters. They also then could ding you for that. So you have to be a little careful, a little more careful about what you're writing in the descriptors. But if you notice, all you level 3 folks out there, that there's no aroma development. You can comment on that later, but there's no aroma development. So you're done with the nose. So we have right here, we have a pronounced wine, and I'll show you the full list of aromas on the next screen. When we get to the palate, what we're doing is dividing the wines in these 5 pockets. Of course, all wines of the world can't fit neatly in these 5 pockets. So even sweet is going to be a range. All of these are going to be a range. So if there's no perceptible sugar, it's dry. If there's just the touch of residual sugar, you're off dry. If you're even asking yourself, wait a minute, am I detecting some sugar? It might be off dry. A sweet wine would be one that is sweet enough to pair with dessert or be a dessert wine. And so that's going to be categories like your Sauterne, your Tokay. However, if sweetness is a discernible factor in your wine, but it's not sweet enough to be a dessert wine and or pair with dessert, that's when you're in the medium category. So you're going to go ahead with sort of medium sweet if that sweetness carries through all the way to the finish, and call it medium dry if the sweetness finishes before the finish. All right, for my wine, I went ahead and I swirled, I tasted it earlier. I have some discernible sweetness in my wine, but this is not a dessert wine, so I'm in the medium camp. And because that sweetness carried through all the way to the end, I called it medium sweet. So mine is medium sweet. Then the acidity level, you're going to go, I know if you're all, level 3, even level 2 through level 4, you know about scales. And so for this wine, I was salivating, burst of salivation, and then I salivated for a long time. That's how I got to my high. Remember, just concentrate on salivating and nothing else. It's almost like putting on your acid hat. You're ignoring tannin if it's a red wine with tannin. You're ignoring everything else and only concentrate on how long you're salivating. You can always trust that. If you have trouble with that, bend your head over. That salivating will get forced to the front of your palate. We're having a white wine today, so we're not going to comment on tannin for this note. However, you can see here with diploma that there's 2 tannin points. One for the level, so how drying is that sensation? Is it all across the gum line and all across the palate? Because then you want to go higher. But anyway, you also have to comment on the nature of the tannin. And pretty much when you talk about the nature, even though we're not going to do it here for this wine, you really can just, compartmentalize your tannin nature into 2 boxes and say, hey, I can either comment on ripeness or I can comment on the texture of the tannins. And of course, your teachers, will help you through this. But the ripeness, just ask yourself, is this sort of like green and stocky? Is it bitter, green, stocky? Or is it rich, rich and rounded? Pick one and then just put, hey, it's bitter, it's stocky, or put it's rich, it's rounded. That's all they're looking for, from you. If you decide to comment on the texture, then it's like, well, is it rough? And a lot of times if they are bitter, green, and stocky, they might be rough. Those go hand in hand. But is it a rough texture or is it a smooth, fine-grained texture? So one or the other will give you the point. But there'll be lots of practice on that. For the alcohol level, it's your perception of the alcohol. So not exactly what's on the bottle. So are you getting warmth or maybe even some heat from the wine? Because then you're going to want to go high. A lot of wines are, medium, unless if they're low, a lot of low wines, for them to be under 11%, you're going to have some residual sweetness often in the wine. So when you have a wine that has residual sweetness like ours, you might want to say, you know what, this fermentation was stopped. There's residual sugar in this wine. In fact, it's medium sweet. This might be under 11% alcohol. So this is one that you would guesstimate is in the low category. For body, you can think about the weight of the wine on your palate, or think of its fluidity in your mouth. So think about body different ways. For my wine here, I went ahead and said, you know what, this is just a medium. I wasn't full bodied and I wasn't light. So I was in the medium camp and I decided to stay right at medium. There was a nice weight, but nothing to bump it up to medium plus. Flavor intensity will generally, follow what's on your palate. Maybe it would be one level away. I don't know if I mentioned it, for this wine itself, but the intensity for this wine is pronounced. I mentioned that we had the pronounced, right, aromas on this wine. Well, they match on the palate. They are pronounced. They're loud. Think of it, if you like to think of music, how loud is it in your mouth? Now, with Diploma, you actually have 4 marks available for flavor characteristics. You could either give 4 flavor characteristics, although hint, always write more, but there's 4 marks available for either flavors, or you could write 3 flavor descriptors and then use the other observations. But you only want to write something in other observations if it's something that is notable, something that you really should point out because it helps you describe the wine. Say something about its texture. If it's really creamy or it's really viscous, that might be something that you want to point out here in other. And so the WSET will give you 3 marks for different flavor descriptors, but then give you a mark for other observations. So flavor characteristics and other observations are 4 marks together. And then the finish is how long the pleasant flavors go. Don't get tricked into everything finishes, right? So if it's just bitterness or you're left just with an acidic texture, do not count those. It's only the pleasant flavors. All right, are we ready finally for our conclusions? Because this is what's important, with WSET in particular for the level 4. Generally, your quality assessment, as I mentioned, is going to be 6 points, and your bottle aging points are going to be 3. So I'm going to go ahead and reveal the note and then talk about these conclusions, because this is where I'd love, if you're prepping for diploma or if you're in diploma or you're thinking of going in diploma, I'd love for you to think about, hey, what would I add? How do I talk about the quality? What do I use? They set you up for success with your level 3. So here's the note of the wine that I just tasted. So you could see I've highlighted a few things. It has pronounced intensity. It's got not only the white floral, but it's got stone fruits, it's got green fruits, it has some secondary, some bread dough, maybe some lees stirring. And it has honey, hay, ginger, petrol, all things that are from maturity. So we have many different clusters here and some different types. So just keep that in mind. What you want to do when you're building your conclusion for your quality conclusion is to read your note. Because if what you put in your quality conclusion doesn't match what's in your note, there's no points for you to gain. However, even if you give a quality assessment, it's still levels like acceptable, good, very good, outstanding. If you get that level wrong, and that's just the 1 point, you can still gain points for your reasoning on why you gave it that level. So don't stop trying, don't stop reading your note, and make sure that you're talking about your note in the quality assessment. But don't worry, I'm going to show you what I mean. Sometimes it's best to show. So anyway, just note that we've got a long finish, we've got pronounced intensity, we've got, this intensity of fruit, and it's balanced by this high acidity, a number of things. We've got sweetness to consider in this wine. So when we talk about the quality, we still use Blick. For those of you who have learned the Blick system already. So balance, length, intensity, or complexity. So it can be any of these things. In fact, the I can also be that you have identifiable fruit characteristics or characteristics in the wine. So they're well defined. All of these things need to be considered, but for diploma, that's just your jumping off level. This is your foundation. This isn't going to get you anywhere unless you explain each of these components in the wine. So you want to explain the quality and pretty much think of it like this. You could pretty much give a sentence for each of these. Talk about the balance. How does the sweetness and or fruitiness stand up to anything sour in the wine, right? Anything, the acid, the tannin, the other structural components. right? How is the balance in a sweeter wine? How is the balance between the acid and the sugar and the sweetness? So these things you want to consider when you think about the balance of a wine. Or does something stand out? And if something stands out in the wine, is it okay because it's balanced by something else in the wine? And again, I keep promising an example. Of course, your length, you want lingering flavors. And when you talk about that in the diploma level, you're going to be describing what lingers. That you want to actually be able to describe, what is lingering, what's happening. So you'll pull out some descriptors. Again, intensity or, concentration or identifiable characteristics, any of those things can fall under the I. And your complexity, you could have just primary, but you have so many clusters under primary, like if with a beautiful ice vine, or any ice wine, you might have all these incredible, clusters from floral to green fruit to stone fruit to, tropical fruit, and then other, wet stone, just beautiful number of clusters that you could say that is something prevalent about the wine that counts instead of just having secondary or tertiary. So it can just be primary. Keep that in mind. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll talk about this a bit more, but let me go ahead and just reveal. I know this is a lot of words. I'm going to read it out, but what I really want you to just focus on is the fact that you can see that there is a sentence, there is a comment about intensity, there is a comment about complexity, there is a comment about the finish, the length, and there are comments about the balance in the wine. So pretty much if you cover each of these things, you'll be convincing the WSET of the level that you gave it. You can get tons of points down here. You may lose the 1 point because you called something good instead of, very good or some other level, but they'll give you points here. So of these 5 points that are available here, the 6 altogether, you'll still get points. They want to just know your reasoning, your argument. Now, in addition to covering each of the BLIC items, right, talking about balance, any length, intensity, complexity, that shouts out about the wine, and these could be negative or positive, you also then want to comment why the wine isn't either at a higher level or a lower level of quality. So that's going to be looked for. So don't forget to comment on that. Well, if you think about it, like a good wine will be something where everything's in balance, right? The fruit, the sugar, the acid, the tannin, the alcohol. It's going to be free of faults, but it'll have something about it, right? It might have balance and then some concentration or some complexity, something that carries it up into the good category. And very good will have something really distinguishable. There's an extra level of complexity, or length or intensity. There's something extra in the wine that you have to give a shout out about. But then you might say, however, it didn't get to be in the outstanding category because, the finishing flavors of blah, 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 and you always mention a few descriptors, didn't sustain, through a long length. It finished, instead at a more moderate medium plus. So you always give something, a very good would have to be lacking in a little something, and you need to state that. So you'll probably have more good, and at least one thing that you're dinging the wine for. And outstanding, there's no important negatives. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it really needs to have strength in all of these components and really have no important negatives for you to call it outstanding. So we've called this wine here today outstanding. And we talked about the expressive, intensely aromatic fruit character of this wine. And then you always mention actual descriptors. Don't just say citrus, stone fruits, tropical. Give actual descriptors. So lemon, nectarine, melon is made further complex by notes of floral, blossom and acacia and wet stones, along with maturing flavors, hay, honey, ginger, all which linger on the long finish. And the marked acidity complements this depth of fruit and that textural richness. and freshens the palate, balancing that wine's medium sweet character. Now, I don't know, I see I spelled palate wrong, apologies for that. But one of the things they'd like for you to do is when you talk about, say, you're talking about balance and you talk about marked acidity, they'd rather you don't just repeat the levels that you put in your note. They see them there. They know, you are looking through your note and you're like, okay, I had high acidity, but I'm not going to put high acidity in my quality assessment. I'm going to put marked, vibrant, any word you can think of that shows another descriptor for the higher bright acidity. So they want you to use other words that mean the same thing as your levels in your note. So keep that in mind. But then we go on to say the wine's concentrated ribbon of flavor, numerous clusters and types, and lingering flavor complexity on the palate showcase an outstanding wine without any important negatives which would have assessed it at a lower quality level. So you spoke to why it was at the outstanding and why it wasn't less than outstanding. So moving on. Let's go ahead and talk about suitability for aging. So they've changed this up a little bit in the last iteration of the diploma, and you generally will have 3 points for this. 1 point will be stating if it's suitable for aging or stating not suitable for aging. But then there's 2 points for you to discuss that, to go ahead and give a reasoning why. And this is just like at the level 3, where you're going to ask yourself 2 questions. 1, does the wine have something structurally that will allow it to age? Sweetness, acidity, tannin. And will it get more interesting? So that is the key. Is this something that, as a professional, you would be recommending, oh, this is suitable for aging, meaning like, go ahead and buy a case and lay this down. This is suitable for aging. You want to consider things like, will the aroma and flavor develop in a positive way? Is there suitable concentration in the wine? It's not overly dilute. Is there balance in the wine? Is there the appropriate amount of acidity and tannin, or anything else that gives the wine structure, right? So you're considering all those things. And don't worry about, I don't know if anybody's in diploma, or maybe hopefully not madly scribbling things down. This is all in a document. So as our student, you will get this and explanations of this, as well as webinars explaining this, in addition to, of course, tasting with us for the in-person classes. But anyway, you want to consider all of those things. So for this wine, and you want to write a couple of sentences. So you want to say, give your answer, right? This wine is suitable for aging. And then say why. Why? What will happen? You're pretty much answering what will happen as this wine ages. Will the aromas and flavors go ahead and deteriorate quickly? Or are they going to gain, is this wine going to gain greater complexity? So here's, one thing you could write, the rich concentration and medium sweetness and elevated acidity provide good structure for aging. And this wine's developing aromas and flavors of honey, hay, ginger, and petrol will deepen and join other tertiary flavors, maybe some nutty, more savory, dried fruit components, making this wine even more interesting and complex as it ages in the bottle over, the next whatever. You don't really have to define years, but you can throw it in. So that's taking this one wine through the whole note. I thought that as a point of interest, I don't know if I'm going way over my time, but I thought as another point of interest, I would add one more note where it's that the quality conclusion is just a little different. And I won't take the whole wine through the note, but you can see here that now we still have a pale lemon wine, but now the intensity is more medium. We have a bit of complexity with the flavors, not to the extent we did in the previous wine. We still have some bright high acidity, but it's a pretty medium minus body, medium intensity, medium finish. So the quality level of this wine is going to be a little different. So this wine we called good, and we pointed out why, but of course then we're going to have to point out why it wasn't given, very good or outstanding, or maybe you could even go, hey, why it wasn't just acceptable. But usually with a good wine, you'd almost have a balance. Speaking of balance, you'd also have a balance between good points and negative points, that you want to note. So this wine shows enough aroma and flavor complexity. There's fresh apple fruit with some interesting notes of blossom and whetstone to balance the juicy acidity, yet without the intensity of the aromas and flavors to grant it a higher level, right, for it to go very good. And also, so we're not giving it, didn't have the intensity. It had complexity and balance. It didn't have intensity and a long finish, especially given the medium finish dominated by lemon, citrus, and green apple fruit. A longer finish would have helped lead to a higher quality level. So you just point, to different things in the wine, but do you see how the blick is a base, is really your jumping off point? So it's really, your canvas. You start with that. Your paint brushes are your blick, your colors are your blick, and then you make your creation from that. And then we'll just talk about suitability for aging before I make one other quick note. So suitability for aging, for this wine, we say this wine is not suitable for bottle aging. While the wine's acidity will keep the wine fresh for several years, it is unlikely to develop more interesting flavors than the attractive fresh floral and fruit characters it currently exhibits, making this a wine to drink now. So you could probably say a little more, but I didn't want to, write several paragraphs for you. But generally, it's just 3 points. So your 3 points would be 1 for your assessment, and then another 2 for pointing out something about its structure and something about, hey, will the wine deteriorate quickly, or do you think it'll gain more complexity? And if this were a red wine, you could be pointing out that, something about the, tannins. You could be talking even in the quality section or the suitability for aging. Tannins soften over time, but other things in the wine don't change very much. Your acid, your sweetness, those don't change very much, but you can talk about your tannins changing over time as well as the wine developing tertiary characteristics. Now, one last thing. How many times have I said that? What I like to do, well, first of all, I'll show you what the wines were. So the wines were, a 216 Cabernet Moselle and a 216 the Hugel Alsace Riesling. So those were the 2 wines. But what I do want to mention too, just looking back on these notes, is that also in diploma, you're asked further questions, identifying either a grape variety, a region, or a country. So if you were just looking at my 2 notes now, I think the big giveaway is petrol, right? But say petrol wasn't there, so you didn't automatically go to Riesling, and you had to guess the grape variety here. You would be looking at a set of 3 wines, and then you would need to have a reasoning for why you thought it was the grape variety you had. So say you looked through these your own notes, you didn't find petrol in the wine, so you put Sauvignon Blanc. You may not get the point for Sauvignon Blanc, but if you put in the arguments, that you have this, it's an aromatic grape variety and it has characteristics of citrus like lemon and so you name something that grape variety has, they'll be like, check, you'll get points for that, even if, your assessment of the grape variety was wrong. But here you can expect, for the Riesling, to have different levels of intensity and sweetness. That was sort of maybe what the key characteristic, was in determining that this would be Riesling over Sauvignon Blanc, is because when you're talking about, identifying, you look at all 3 of the wines that you have in front of you together. And one of them is generally a marker, one that you should be a little more obvious than the other 2. And so if you have a range of expressions like you do with this wine, like this aromatic, but this one is sweet and that high acidity is balanced by that sweetness. And this other wine was dry, but, boy, now you've got the same grape variety that, is made in this dry style and then made in this sweeter style. Thinking, well, does that happen with Sauvignon Blanc around the world? Not generally, so that would help lead you towards assessing it as Riesling instead. But don't worry, we have diploma teachers, Peter Marks on our staff, Janet Campen, and numerous others who are fantastic, at explaining what other grape varieties it could potentially be and how you might know, how to guess best, how to assess best which it is. Anyway, so that's my session for today. I hope that gave you an insight into a diploma note. And then also, it's kind of like fun. It's like a puzzle in deciding the quality and suitability for aging of the wine.
Ah, yes, the great wine puzzle. We're all still trying to figure it out, right? It's a journey that never ends. That quest for ultimate wine knowledge. But thanks so much for sharing your depth of knowledge on a WSET level 4 diploma tasting note. Hopefully everyone got as much out of it as I did. It's always a great refresher. Thanks so much, Catherine. And we look forward to having you back again on a Wednesday study hall. A quick reminder that we have our Monday Fun Day Wine Trivia Challenge every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, so make sure and join us for that. And then a couple of things I also want to call out are two very special events that we have coming up. One is a free webinar with the wine legend Hugh Johnson and Academy de Vin Library, which will be taking place on September 26th, and you can find more details out about that on our website. And the other one is the Languedoc Sommelier Challenge. So we are asking for entries for the Sommelier Challenge, a great competition that you can join if you're in the wine industry and win some pretty fantastic prizes. And that's in a partnership with Napa Valley Wine Academy and the Languedoc wine region. So, Catherine, you're involved in both of those, so I think they're pretty exciting projects.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you back here next Monday for trivia. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris.